Hi everyone. This is a helper video to go along with the video I did on how to test a for loop. Um, One of the questions I got was just more details on like when we would use a for loop, why would we use a for loop? And so this video is more of an explainer of the agent that I built. And so I'll first show you the output, then we'll work backwards and talk about how this was built. Um, a lot of agents on Agent AI work off a single item. You give it a LinkedIn profile, it does some research on a person. You give it a YouTube video, it does the transcription. But what if you wanted to work on a list of YouTube videos or a list of LinkedIn profiles and you wanted to provide that as an input to the agent? Now you need some way for that agent to be able to take that list, loop through each item in the list one by one, and then run some process and then collate the output and then push it out. And so I kind of visualize this process here in this little mirror. So you have a list of items. This could be using the get user list function in Agent AI, or it could be a CSV, it could be a JSON. Doesn't matter what the list is in. Now, obviously, once you get this list, then you need to read and store those list of items in Agent AI. So that list is sitting somewhere. Either it's sitting on your desktop, it's sitting on your computer. You need to now pass it to Agent AI so that Agent AI then reads that list. And once Agent AI reads that list, it then has to store that in an object that then you take and then you loop through each item in the list. And then for each item, basically, as you're looping, you then do some action on it, and then there's some output of the action. And again, if you think about it, let's say I'm researching a topic. And so the first topic is Gen AI, and then the action that I'm doing on that is researching Gen AI. I need to now store that somewhere while I'm still inside that loop. And so that's why you store it in another list object. And then after that, you go to the second item in the list. And let's say now this is college visits. You loop through that, do some research on college visits, and store that in a list object. And so now what you have at the end of this is an object which has a list of research that has been done. Then you exit the loop with that list of research that is done, and then you pass it. That's the list of outputs, and then you pass it on to another activity action that can actually go then display the output. So that's the basic process. There are a few different ways to provide inputs of lists. This first video I'm going to do is just going to keep it really, really simple without getting into the complications of this. This is going to talk about if I actually use the list uh, object in Agent AI. And so let's say the topics that I'm interested in are generative AI, and then you hit an enter. And then let's say another topic I'm interested in is college visits. And if I hit go, what this is now going to do, and let's see if we can kind of follow this in the dev console. It first gets the list of items, and then from that, it then runs a for loop, and it'll now loop through that. You'll now see, look, it's looking at generative AI. So it picked that up, and then go through it, do the work, and then get the next topic, which will be college visits, and do some research on that, and then it kind of gives you an output. Now in the debug window, it's hard to see it going through the loops. The other way to do this is to actually go to agent runs. And so, by the way, this is the output. So it researched both of them and it showed you both those outputs. So you can go to agent runs, and let's see if this is any better in helping you actually see what's going on. Um, so here you'll look, I have my test for loop. Um, you'll notice that, so where did it start? Test for loop 2030, 2030, 2038. And so that was a previous test for loop that I ran. So let's say this one. Yep. So here is where it starts. And I basically loaded that. And so the first item in the for loop is my generative AI. So that's what gets passed. And then this is what is happening. It's actually doing some research, figured this out, stores it to the loop in a list object. So you'll see now it's stored in that list object. Then I go to the next item, which is college visits. And then it then does research on the college visits. And then now you'll notice it stores both items. So you'll see here now generative AI was stored. And then this is my second research. And this is what a list object in Agent AI looks like. It's this kind of square bracket, and anything within the quotes is the research that is getting stored. And then I go and I kind of just present it out. So agent runs is a good way to kind of go and debug what is happening. So now if we get to the actual agent, So the first thing we'll notice is that I am using this get user list action. And so if I go to action, I say instead of get user input, which is a single item, if I say get user list, Agent AI will take whatever you enter and automatically put it into a list object that Agent AI understands that the for loop works off of. And so I here take that, I store it in this out underscore list underscore topic. So I'm going to give it two topics, generative AI and college visits. It's stored in a list object. A list object, think of it as basically an array. And in this case, this array out list topics is going to have two items, generative AI and college visits. And then now that I have it, if we go back to my video here, I've now got it stored into this list object. It's a Python list object. I need to now loop through each item. And so the way you loop through it is to do what is known as a for loop. So the for loop is basically saying, uh, it's a short form in coding for each. And so for each item in the loop is the way you want to think about it. And so the way you do a for loop is you go add action, run process, and you say for loop. And when you select that, you first say, what is the list that I want to loop over? And so this is that list that we basically stored, which was basically my list of topics. And so that is what goes here. So that's the list. So first I tell it what is the list. And so that's the list of topics. Then I want to say, as I'm looping through this, what do I want to store the current value in? And so if you think about it, the first time it loops through it, the index is 0. And so, I mean, basically, if it's two items in your list, then the size of the list is 2. The first is 0 and the second is 1. It's just kind of how it works. And so the index is 0. So the first time it will go, and then the loop variable will have the first value in that index, which is basically generative AI, which was my first item in the list. And so loop variable is basically saying store, as you're going through this list, store the first item or whatever the item for that particular index is in this loop variable. And that's what's happening. And then what I'm doing is I'm basically saying research this particular topic and return a summary. And so because we are inside the loop here, so you'll notice the loop starts here and ends over here, what is happening is this piece of code will get run again and again and again, depending on how many items there are. Or basically that index goes, till the size of the item. So initially it'll go through it once. So it'll go loop through this, and then it'll store the output in another list variable. Because again, if I'm having 2 or 3 researches done, how do I store it? Because if I store it in a variable that is not a list, then the second time it goes through, it'll just overwrite it. And so this is where, I mean, these are some kind of programming concepts to be aware of, is if I have a list and I'm going through it, it's better to, store the output in a list so that otherwise, if you just store it in a variable, it'll get overwritten when it goes through the list again. And so that's what's happening here. And so it gets stored in list research, and then that's the end of it. So it'll loop through this twice because there were 2 items. If there are 3 items, it'll loop through it twice. 3 times, if there are 40 items, it will loop through this 40 times, and you will have this list of 40 outputs. And then after that, all I'm saying is I'm providing you with a research done on a list of topics. And then this is the research that was done, just formatted. So this is, at the end of it, I'm just operating on a list. And that's how this works. So hope this was useful to just explain the for loop in more detail. I'll do another video on how to handle CSVs and talk about that. While I have a video that talks about the how to, I'll talk about why CSVs and some nuances on how Agent AI handles uh, files that are passed to it which have lists in them.